but been focusing on some family issues, so she's not able to be here with us today. So I want to thank everybody for being here, being part of this network. Something that Joni, Dawn, and I all talk about is bringing people together, doing similar things, and kind of sharing the successes and the challenges. And I just think this, monthly opportunity is such a great way for us to come together and share what's going on, and hopefully share some successes and lessons learned. Been working with contracts for a while and doing supported employment for a while, and I'm always learning new things because I talk to other providers and they share some of their concerns with me. So I really want to just reinforce that this is a great opportunity to really share and build a little bit of a job developers cadre coalition to really help the people that we serve. So thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you, Darren. And maybe to follow Darren up a little bit, and maybe we can open the floor before we get started to any topics that people are interested in seeing for future months. We try to kind of frame it around job development, but not everything is solely focused on job development. We'd like to kind of include some innovative discussions around career development and other challenges or areas of need. So if you have any training ideas, that would be great. You can use the chat or unmute your mic. I think Darren can take a peek at the chat. Is that right, Darren? Can you see the chat?
Okay.
Thank you. To let us know if there's anything in there. So anything, Darren?
It looks like right now there's just a lot of great introductions.
Great. Welcome, everyone.
Hey, Amanda.
Hi. Amanda, did you want to talk about any topics or areas? If others have ideas on what they would like to see over the next few months, that would be really helpful for Darren, Dawn, and I in our planning. If not, we certainly have topics that we've gathered throughout the last couple of months from individuals, so let us know. And I apologize for the quick announcement. So I know that it may not have gone out early, but if you want to keep this on your calendar for every Darren, what is it? Second Thursday? Every second Thursday of the month at 9 a.m. we will have this call. Darren, anything in the chat?
People are thinking.
Great. So we're going to get started and talk a little bit about supporting individuals in their own job search, how to help someone with their own job search and job seeking skills. What's the role of the employment specialist? But before we get started, Darren brought up the fact that we, maybe not every call, but for the majority of the calls, we do like to get an understanding of what some challenges are, some successes, an opportunity to use this as a learning collaborative, a learning community where you can get some feedback from Darren and Dawn and I, but also from other individuals who are providing employment services and maybe experiencing similar challenges. So maybe what we can do is talk a little bit about some successes first. So what was one success that you've had this past month or couple of months or past few months while providing job development or employment services? You can unmute your mic or use the chat. Darren will look at the chat and read those out for us. So, think about a success that you've had, and a success could be getting a call back from an employer or working with someone to develop an employment goal or clarify values with someone. Maybe they were uncertain what type of employment they were interested in, and you were able to use some strategies and discussions. It looks like there might be something in the chat, Darren. I think you're on mute. Oh.
I totally am. Looks like Vanessa says one of her participants just got a job.
Yes. So if we think about that, the success was the person got the job. What do you think contributed to the success? And kind of asking some of these questions and being able to articulate what some of the contributing factors are might help others here in the group.
And I also wanted to share that Rob just shared that one of his participants is starting Monday as a case manager at CPS.
Oh, fantastic. Congratulations. So maybe Rob or Vanessa can share what they think contributed to the success. How did you feel after the success? You can unmute your mic if that's more convenient, or type in the chat, whatever your preference is.
And Amanda just shared that they arranged 2 informational interviews for a job seeker.
Great.
On how to start their own nonprofit. This is such a cool thing where everybody's having these really person-centered job ideas coming to fruition. So,
Absolutely.
kudos.
Yes. So help. And it looks like something else just popped in.
Rob is talking about mock interviews, having someone to talk through anxieties. Absolutely.
Yes. So having those mock interviews, practicing with the person, just allowing the person to kind of, discuss what they want and kind of free flow with the mock interview, and then offering some suggestions and some other supports that might help refine those interviews. And we're going to talk a little bit about interviewing today as well. Anything else in the chat, Darren, before we move on to talking about maybe some obstacles or other challenges?
Not yet. So just thank you for adding things. I just wanted to share about mock interviews. Sometimes it was my anxiety too, working with somebody who had a job goal in mind. And it's just like, maybe I didn't think they had the skills and abilities or that comfort level to really push those strength-based issues. And so I really helped me as well to learn about the job seeker and how they would do in that situation. So I just kind of want to share, sometimes I had anxiety along with the job seeker I was working with and meeting employers.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that resonates with many people, kind of the uncertainty, and then having those mock interviews, you can really get a sense of how the person shares their job history, their strengths, and their challenges and weaknesses. Alana, did you have something to contribute? Thank you. So let's kind of piggyback that success with some challenges. What were some challenges that people encountered over this past month, whether it's job development or employment service provision? What were some things that kind of got in the way, or you could really benefit from hearing from the group today about what obstacles you might be encountering, and maybe get some feedback from others here? And sometimes the challenge is just like Darren mentioned, maybe our own insecurities, our own fears, our own trepidations, our own uncertainties, and that's okay. This is a group that, we maintain the confidentiality of the group here, and from the last several years I've been facilitating this, it's been a very supportive group. And when people do discuss challenges and obstacles, the group has been very, very quick to offer some good suggestions and feedback. So, please keep that in mind when you're sharing.
I had a challenge this week. One of my employment specialists was taking a job seeker to get a new driver's license because they lost theirs. And if my employment specialist hadn't been there, the worker at the license was not going to help them because they insisted they didn't have the right documents, even though they did. And my employment specialist had to step in and ask for a supervisor who reluctantly helped them, but would not print out a letter for them that they needed. So they had to go off site, get this thing printed, bring it back, and right before closing they were able to get it. But if my person hadn't been there, the job seeker definitely would have just left at the first resistance. And now they can apply for jobs because they have their hiring documents.
Yeah, that advocacy is so important, and the employment specialist knew in the moment to advocate and to support the person in that, you know, like you said, the person may have just walked away, may have not gotten what they needed for the job search.
It looks like Denise shared that their job seekers following through on applications and interviews.
Great. That's great. What do you think's contributing to that, Denise? What do you think contributes to job seekers following through, and or is that a challenge?
Actually, that's a challenge.
Challenge, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think others on the call can probably agree that that may be a challenge that others experience. So let's talk a little bit about that. So kind of what's the frame, you know, the person applies for a position and then doesn't go to the interview. What's happening?
Well, a lot of my clients are dealing with multiple barriers and transitioning out of, most of them are transitioning out of homelessness, and so they don't necessarily have established routines in place that so they're not used to really, following a schedule and having, assigned activities. And so it usually takes multiple tries and kind of multiple plans and stuff before, they're able to see a few successes.
And it sounds like you're meeting the person where they are, you're recognizing and you have that empathy, understanding that there are other challenges that are happening in the person's life that might be preventing kind of that follow through. So recognizing that it may not just be the person just doesn't want to, or doesn't have the skills, but maybe there are other competing priorities or factors happening now.
Yeah. I think one of my challenges is assisting them where I need to, but also giving them their own autonomy.
Yep.
When needed.
And we're going to talk about
right?
that today.
I don't want to do everything for them. So.
And I think this topic today covers that. How do we support someone in the job search if the person, may not want you to job develop on their behalf, or, it's important for the person to understand how to find employment, right? How to apply for jobs and interview.
Right. Well, and sometimes they do want me to do a lot on their behalf, right? And I do want to do that, but I also want to be able to draw boundaries so that they can start to, increase their skills.
What do others do to help support someone in their job search? What are some ways, and that kind of gets us into our topic, to kind of clarify. I know there are a couple of more items in the chat, and Darren, I don't know if you wanted to bring those up, but I think Denise is bringing up a good point and kind of sets the stage for our discussion today about what are the employment specialist roles in supporting independent job searches? How can we encourage independence, encourage autonomy, without, doing everything for the person, but encouraging the person to learn those skills and identify what resources and supports are available in their communities.
Yeah, I wanted to invite Ricky if he wanted to, share a little bit about one of his team members helping somebody, with the goal of owning a beauty salon, and kind of focusing on that engagement and the ups and downs of the job seeker having that buy-in and motivation through the process, similar to what Denise was sharing about. Sometimes it's hard to get that buy-in to follow through.
Ricky, did you want to unmute and further discuss?
Yeah, I just felt like it was a good recent example for my team to bring up of yeah, someone who, you know, seemed very motivated. They wanted to go to beauty school to eventually start their own salon.
Mhm.
But once they were enrolled and they started going to classes, they weren't following through on their attendance. And according to the employment specialist, it seemed like you know, there was kind of like a different excuse every day, and it, you know, it seemed like, you know, whether it's because of um, you know, maybe feeling like, you know, you know, it could have been something due to, at least in my opinion, from talking to them, something to do with just, you know, not feeling confident in their abilities.
Mhm.
You know, once they're enrolled, you can get nervous and something new, right? And so that can always be a difficult hurdle for people. So it's kind of going back to square one and seeing, you know,
Mhm.
what are those things that deterred them from continuing, whether it was, you know, life events or just, you know, their own confidence, something like that. So
No, I think that's a great example, and we often refer to that as readiness, but not readiness in the sense of the person has the ability, but the person's intent. And sometimes readiness is influenced by the person's current felt need. You know, what's the person's current dissatisfaction with their current situation? What's the urgency? And then it also, another factor of readiness to look at is the person's commitment. Does the person believe that going back to beauty school or opening a salon would be possible and positive? And if not, what are ways to help develop those areas of readiness? Maybe, you know, shadowing someone, maybe talking with someone who has their own business, maybe talking with people at the school. And then there's also two other factors to consider: the person's knowledge of themselves as worker, and that influences some of the commitment and felt need. If the person doesn't know what their interests are, what their values are, what they're good at, sometimes it's difficult to engage in employment goals and working towards something. And then conversely, if the person doesn't know what the world of work it requires, if the person doesn't know, you know, what the jobs are, what do they involve? Early on in my career working as an employment specialist, I remember a lot of people, I mean, this is dating me significantly, but a lot of people were so concerned that every job required computer skills. And I can't, you know, I'm not going to work. I'm not going to find something because I don't have those skills, or I'm not good at the computer. And that held people back from even trying to, you know, they might have, to go back to Denise, not followed through. They might have just didn't go on the interview because of those fears that I don't have those skills. And then kind of going through and discussing and using some online tools and, you know, kind of showing them like what jobs require and what they, you know, that they do have the skills or they can learn the skills, kind of helps in that situation. So if you can think about those four factors: the person's felt need, the commitment, which is the belief that work is possible and positive. You know, possible might be kind of what you're saying, Ricky. Does the person believe that I can do this? Positive might be, is this going to enhance my life? You know, am I going to be losing friends that I now see during the day or hours that I might be working, or am I going to lose benefits? So having those discussions and helping the person develop those areas, and then knowing what the world of work expects and what they know about themselves as a worker are also
Workforce
areas.
Family Services, this is Deborah.
Deborah, hi, Deborah. Did you want to contribute? Oh, I think you need to mute.
Hang on, I'm
Deborah,
trying
can
to
you
mute.
Yeah, thank you. So maybe that's something in some follow-up calls we can talk about: readiness, assessment, and development, how to assess those areas and how to help someone develop those areas so that they can feel confident in choosing employment or working towards their employment goal. Darren, is there anything else in the chat?
I don't see anything.
Okay. So why don't we get into our content today? So another sort of way to get us kind of talking and better understanding how we provide that support. So here I'm posing a question. How do you support job seekers in their own job search or career development? What are some ways that you are currently supporting individuals in job searching or career development? What are some ways that you're providing that support? You can use the chat or unmute your mic. We'll give a couple of minutes or half a minute or so for people to write in the chat.
Jeffrey sharing about, working on a resume, work history, help them with some online platforms like Indeed.
Yeah,
Set up the
so kind of
profile.
exposing to online platforms, maybe illustrating and demonstrating how to use some of the online platforms, resume development. Anything else in the chat?
Sounds like Olivia is helping people those same strategies.
Okay. We'll just wait another 30 seconds or so before we move on. So what might be, or what are the barriers to engaging job seekers in the job search? Denise kind of brought up some barriers that maybe people aren't following through because they have other things happening in their life that make it difficult. Maybe some of those areas such as housing and transportation. What are some other barriers to engaging job seekers in the job search? Because like Denise said, we want to encourage people to be part of the job search, right? It's their job search, and we can provide that support and job development, and certainly help out and assist when we can. But what are some of the barriers that you've all seen in helping in engaging job seekers? Anything, Darren?
Some discussions about, behavioral health issues can be a
Okay.
barrier, as well as time management,
Okay.
or getting off track.
So some time management, people getting off track might be barriers. So can you describe the person who said getting off track, what that means and what that looks like?
Olivia, do you want to share?
I would just say just getting off track, as in just not prioritizing their day, their time. So like we've talked about, setting reminders on her phone maybe, or I've also talked to her about setting up an Indeed account. That's primarily the search engine I use, because you can just upload your resume and cover letter right on the profile. And I really like that, because other employers can also view the resume and cover letters as well for a specific area that you would like to work in. So like for somebody that's interested in like retail, then you'll get, more people viewing that and then messaging you on Indeed, typically, that review your resume and see that you have some of the job details. I'm like not fully able to word everything, but you guys know what I mean. All the stuff.
Totally understand.
And so just working with her on the time management, because for her, she's not been able to keep a job for more than a couple months, just because of, like somebody else said, mental health barriers and things like that. So just working with her on some coaching on that, some strategies to be able to help her with time management, things like that, like setting reminders, using calendars, setting reminders when you need to leave, even just like reminders to just get ready, just those types of things that will help her be more successful in getting to work on time, getting to the interview, like all of those types of things, like looking for jobs, coming to the appointment with me. But typically I have them look through it. Like we typically do this job search here in the office, and then I'll usually say, okay, to look for a couple of jobs for next time we meet, that you're interested in applying for. So that's kind of where I let them kind of take the lead a little bit and give them that independence to look for a couple of jobs that they're they're interested in applying.
And I imagine, thank you for sharing. I imagine that getting connected with Indeed, completing those tasks, uploading the resume, uploading the cover letter, seeing that employers are interested or getting some responses from employers could really support the person in kind of continuing to engage.
Yeah, absolutely. And, for the internet access, yeah, a lot of participants don't have internet access or they don't have a laptop. So, I do suggest Goodwill. They have a computer lab. I also suggest the city library. They have computer labs. And then also we have laptops that we can use in our conference room as well if they needed to use the laptop. Sometimes they're using their phone. There's an app for Indeed, which is pretty great, that they can just easily access on their phone. I have somebody doing that. And yes, it makes it a little bit more challenging, but they still can access that and see, messages from employers and respond and all that kind of stuff. So
I think what you're doing is helping the person see that, just because they may not have a laptop or access to a computer, you're helping them identify other ways. Using the phone may not be that easy or maybe a little clunky, but once the person kind of downloads the app and is able to use it, now that's another resource. Anything else, Darren?
There's quite a few things,
Okay.
a lot of things going on in the chat right now. Denise mentioned substance abuse issues,
Mhm.
which can impact people. Jeffrey talked about transportation or people with their behavioral health being overwhelmed and the anxiety going through the roof, or maybe some negative symptom management going on there. Or Ricky talked about lack of response from applications that can really impact somebody's behavioral health. I know when I was applying for jobs, it affects everybody, no matter where you're at in this life right now. Or Marcia said limited work history and, looking at their own work history and trying to put some of that together. And Deborah, I just want to invite you if you want to jump in to share a little bit about, helping people set priorities.
That'd be great.
Yeah, one of the things I do try to explain to them is that they are afraid to say no to friends and family. And, I explain, if you want a different outcome, you have to do something different. And prioritizing is not always easy for any of us. You have family obligations, you've got, people you want to go hang out with. But if you're homeless and have no job, your primary goal, and this is what I share with them, the primary goal should be taking care of yourself and getting your needs met, which means, following through with those job applications. I have one client who she would fill out the applications, but she wouldn't turn them in. And so I'm like, okay, so what can I do to help you feel confident enough to go drop those off? And she basically asked me if I did it and, held me accountable, which is great. But, like I told her, if you have 15 other people you're working with or 20, you need them to help themselves. And I'm happy to be supportive until they can do it on their own. But I also don't want them to become so dependent on me that I'm prioritizing for them instead of the other way around. And so she's still having difficulties. I think a lot of hers is lack of self-esteem. She used to be quite slender and she now is quite heavy. And she she came in and applied for a job here at the WFS office where I work, and she laid on the table while we were interviewing her. And it's so that was one of the first things I talked to her about, is how you present yourself when you're talking to a prospective employer, and helping her to understand that one of the priorities is personal cleanliness, how you hold your body when you're talking to people. Those are all priorities for, being successful. And like you said, it affects all of us. When you go apply for 20 jobs and you don't get one, it's depressing because you drive through town and there's hundreds of, we're hiring signs.
Right.
So it is very demoralizing. And if you're already depressed or suffering from behavioral health problems, it makes it more difficult. And
Mhm.
for her, that's part of her problems. She lacks self-esteem. She's been homeless for 2 years. She's, so there's a lot going on in her world. She has chronic health issues besides the mental health. And so she's dealing with those barriers. So helping with priorities does help her. She said, it helps her a lot, because I told her, start writing everything down. Don't leave it to your memory because you forget. And all of us do. If you've got lots going on in your world, it's easy for things to fall through the cracks. So she has been trying really hard to put things in notes and put them where she can find them. And we were joking because I have like 3 billion sticky notes all over my office. And so I'm like, I had one client tell me I needed a sticky note to show me where my other sticky notes were.
That's true. That's true.
But yeah, so I can relate with them about, prioritizing, making sure that we're doing what's most important first. And then, as we go down the list, but self-care is going to have to be a big priority for most of our clients because they don't understand. They've lost that. They've lost the ability to take care of themselves because of their situation. They're just in survival mode.
Yeah, a lot of times researchers refer to that as the why try effect, where people have, gone through so much hardship and negative responses, and to help with that is exactly what you're doing, providing those tools, providing those resources and strategies to help manage it, and also appropriate self-disclosure. This is something I struggle with too, right? Like the time management, and kind of normalizes it. Sometimes people think like it's just me, I'm the only one that has these issues or problems. So thank you for sharing that. Any other barriers before we move on? And we're going to talk about some ways to engage job seekers in the job search. So thinking about teaching new skills, just like Deborah mentioned, teaching skills to prioritize, teaching skills, different self-care skills that are important. Also the skills related to just the concrete job search, applications, resume writing, approaching employers through those mock interviews, and so on. This second kind of heading here, support decisions of job seekers, I did want to talk a little bit about what happens if you may not agree with the decisions that a job seeker is choosing for an employment setting, or prioritizing things in their life. And how do you resolve that? The idea that someone is deciding on something, we should absolutely support that decision and find those strengths and skills, use that strengths-based approach. But what happens if you don't agree with that decision? How do you resolve that?
Yeah, Amanda shared that, having that discussion about some of the pros and cons, which, can be a challenge because sometimes people are so fixated on one thing, and how to, expand that skill set to look at other potential opportunities.
Absolutely. So using some pros and cons, kind of discussing what some of those advantages and disadvantages to that might be. Last month, we had a webinar on listening for change talk and sort of minimizing sustained talk. So using some of those MI techniques. Anything else before we move on to the third area here?
Not in the chat, but I just also found it, like education and some reality checks in terms of some of the criteria that some people might think that they want, and just educating about the process or the application or the physical nature or, the stamina or maybe environmental cues, just educating. And sometimes I took people out to environments, just,
Yes,
hey, are you
yes.
sure this is, in alignment with what you think it is? Because even I had some jobs I help people with. I thought it was one thing, but when you're in the environment, it's like, wow, there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of people telling you what to do. I would have a hard time doing some of the things.
And sometimes that healthy risk is trying out the job and supporting the person in that position, and really looking at, what do you like about it? What don't you like about it? If you want to move on to something else, let's talk about what you learned from this experience. What are some of the values that you kind of can identify as having or clarifying after going through this?
Yeah, Deborah just shared about, reading the job description. I think that's a great idea, just to kind of see if you're getting buy-in on all the little things that employers put on those forms.
Yeah, and I think it's ONET, the Occupational Information Network, has little video clips of different occupations. They're not long or lengthy, but it gives a little bit of an idea of what different jobs require, and you're hearing from the person in that position what it is, and sometimes that's helpful to expose the person to what that position's about. And then encouraging, it sounds like all the feedback today is all about what you all do to encourage individuals to help promote that identity of worker and minimize that illness identity. Illness identity and why try is sort of combined, where people develop that illness identity. I've received services for many years, and this is kind of the identity that I have now, and kind of helping to link them immediately with Indeed and get their resume done and get their applications completed. Let them see that they do have skills. And then the SMART goal planning that helps to kind of address what Deborah was saying about prioritizing and kind of using that SMART goal. Specific goals need to be very specific, measurable, something that the person can see movement towards. Maybe it's, as someone mentioned, coming back with 2 potential employers to contact this week. Achievable or attainable. So goals need to be really achievable. So something that you and the person can kind of talk through and identify achievable goals, realistic. Again, kind of going back to what Darren said, exposing the person and educating about what the jobs entail, whether that's shadowing or, looking at job descriptions or talking with people who've been in that position, but really, encouraging the person to see what that job is. And then of course the T is time framed, time bound. So making sure that there's an end in sight. So, in the next 2 weeks or whatever's feasible and manageable for the person, but helping them really identify that time frame.
I just wanted to put in a shameless plug for Rutgers, because we've worked with you and your other teammates in SMART goals and the golden thread of documentation, blending those together. So just a shout out for that. I'll try to look for that episode and put it in with the email when I send. That would be
great. That would be so great. Because like Darren mentioned, many of these webinars are recorded, and my colleagues have done a lot of work around SMART goal planning. So that'd be really helpful. But again, that type of goal planning helps someone to work towards something. So we're going to move into kind of the concrete skills right now, resume writing. We're gonna look at some different types of resumes. Also, you want to be mindful of applicant tracking systems, ATS. So you want to make sure you're using a resume style that won't kind of eliminate you immediately. So you don't want to use, tables or graphics and weird columns and weird headings. You want to try to make it, it can certainly have some interest and some creativity, but you want to be mindful that it's not going to get dismissed from the applicant tracking system. So you want to make sure that you're, even identifying some keywords from the job description in the resume, in your application, so that you can help the person, if you're looking at the job description, try to write the resume to address some of those responsibilities and skills that the employer is requiring. So a couple of different types of resumes. The chronological resume is kind of the one that we're familiar with, right? You have dates and you put the dates and plug in your positions and talk a little bit about what you've done in those positions. And then there's a skills or functional resume that we're going to talk about now. If someone has a work history, if someone has recent work, a functional or skills resume may not be the best choice for that person. However, if someone hasn't worked for a while, they're maybe moving into a brand new field where they don't have any relevant experience or recent relevant experience, gaps in employment, you might want to encourage them to look at a functional or skills-based resume. There's right here at the bottom is a link to a nice brief kind of overview of functional resumes and kind of some do's and don'ts and some, samples. And then I also have some samples here that we can look at that we're going to spend some time on. So when you're working with someone, what are some of the advantages to using a functional or skills resume? What do you think could be helpful? It's really looks like something like this, where you're not necessarily identifying the dates, but you're more looking at clusters of skills and accomplishments. This is just a little brief excerpt from a skills or functional resume for someone who's interested in going into a career service or a customer service position. You're kind of like identifying what those skills are. Maybe you want to pull in some of the job description information when you're identifying the skills or helping the person identify the skills. You also still need to include an employment history and education, but it's a way for an employer to see that you have some skills. However, it could raise some red flags. It's not something that's typically used. However, in those situations that we just talked about, gaps in employment, no work history, but maybe the person has some of these skills from volunteer positions or other areas in their life that they were able to gain some of these skills. But you want to be using a functional resume judiciously. If the person has, fairly robust work history, certainly you want to use the more acknowledged chronological form. So I encourage you to look at this little article that's listed here. Here's an example. When you get the PowerPoint presentation, you can expand it and have it look a little bit, larger, but Indeed has some good templates on there that you can look at to kind of give you a little bit more information of how to help someone craft a functional resume. If you can kind of see here, it's really listed on more of like what skills the person has and clustered around those skill areas. And again, some user-friendly templates on Indeed. The other resource certainly has some good information too. In our Integrated Employment Institute here at Rutgers, we have a job seeking skills workbook that you can upload at the website here that gives like a lot of information about all job seeking skills, different blank applications that you can use with someone, different resume writing worksheets to kind of help develop objectives, help develop other areas of the resume, help to write the functional resume, gives examples of both functional and chronological. I would suggest when you get the PowerPoint, certainly upload it. It's free. And it's a nice workbook that you can use with the person, or you can, provide some pages to the person kind of as a way to engage them in the job search and different sections of the workbook. Darren, would you think it would be helpful to go through the workbook and look at it now, or just kind of keep
Well, I
that
think
as a resource?
maybe kind of high level, just to kind of look at some of the specifics of it. I think that would be helpful. I haven't looked at that before, so it looks like a new resource for me.
Yeah, maybe what we'll do is kind of, it encompasses applications, interviews, and resumes. So maybe what we'll do is at the end, I'll bring it up and we can go through it. But just to kind of keep us on task a little bit here, looking at chronological resumes, again, these are the ones that you're more familiar with, kind of a good choice if someone's staying in the same field or they have some knowledge or in-depth knowledge of the field. There's no major gaps. So this is kind of the more familiar one. List jobs from present to past. So again, here's just a little sample of what a chronological resume looks like, and that job seeking skills workbook can kind of help you engage the person in developing some of the areas of the resume. We also want to help someone in completing job applications, right? So some of the areas that are sticky for a lot of people or areas of concern are those gaps in work history, and coming up with reasons for leaving jobs, identifying employment references. But the gaps in work history is bolded here because this is oftentimes an area that people who've been out of the workforce for a while may not have a lot of work experience, or may have jumped from job to job, may have. So helping the person maybe complete a self-inventory of skills that they have, maybe mock interviews to prepare of how to acknowledge periods of unemployment, what was the person doing during that time, helping to describe what those gaps are. Maybe help the person in the interim begin to fill in some of those gaps. Maybe, the person is good at writing or could, contribute to blog posts in something that they're interested in. And, while they're looking for work, they could be filling in some of that gap that they might have with some of that type of work. So what are some of the challenges when you're working with someone with gaps in employment? What are some of the problems that you've encountered or problems that people have encountered? I have some things listed here that, oftentimes explaining those gaps is difficult. Darren?
No, I've definitely found out some of that is, really a challenge for folks, or maybe they can't really remember what they did, and we have to go back to maybe Social Security or
Yes,
WorkSource or
yes.
somebody to kind of request, a printout of where people had worked to kind of refresh memory a little bit and create that conversations about, well, there are times you were successful. Let's find out more about those skill sets.
Absolutely. My colleague and I did a focus group with human resource professionals, and we asked them very pointed questions about hiring individuals with mental health conditions. And some of the themes that came out included having someone come in confidently to the interview, but also being able to explain those gaps in employment or jumps. Applications should be complete and include reasons for leaving jobs. The HR professionals that we worked with or had the focus groups with said, as if people are describing and including reasons, that would probably land them in the A pile, versus someone who's just leaving that blank or not completing it. So really helping the person, brainstorming with the person about what were they doing, how to fill in those areas. And Darren, I think we have some past trainings just on like a full, webinar on addressing gaps in employment. And that's certainly something we can put on our schedule for the upcoming year. I mean, I have a whole training on gaps in employment. So, maybe we can send out the recording, or we can think about having that again.
Absolutely. Like Deborah said, yeah, the gaps in the history is definitely a challenge. And I like how Jeffrey shared that sometimes you have to pivot between resumes and styles, depending on the skills and
Yes.
abilities or the functional level of the individual you're working with. So
Absolutely.
that's a great point. These are tools to kind of use at your disposal.
Yes. And whatever works best for the person, everything is based on the individual and what their needs are and what their interests are. Just a little bit about cover letters. Again, in that resource that we're going to provide, kind of walks through like how to develop a cover letter. But if at all possible, individualize it. If they give the name of the person who is the hiring manager, if you know that, try to individualize it. Certainly do spelling and grammar check. That's kind of certainly something that we would always do. If you're sending it out, if you're not sending it through Indeed or other online platforms, if you're actually mailing it out, which you may still be doing, or dropping it off, which if you're, and depending on where, it might be a small kind of town area that maybe dropping it off makes sense. Try to match the paper, addressing it to the correct person, highlight skills and experience from the resume. And again, maybe taking some of that from the job description so that you're getting through some of those applicant tracking systems. Just kind of, the cover letter might even be more important now, in light of a lot of the remote job search that people are doing, kind of making sure that it gets to the right person, and do a little research on the company. And this again, just just gives you like what it could look like, the heading, the intro, how you found out about the job, how you can meet their needs. And this opening and that intro, how you found out about the job, this kind of lends credence to maybe doing some networking, right? So if you can kind of say, oh, I have a friend, or, so I know this person who works here, or however, that might be helpful for you in getting the job. So encourage the person to develop their own networks. The body, why you, kind of write what skills you have and what makes you unique. And then the closing, what's next, the follow-up. You can find lots of good resources on cover letters. These are just kind of hitting the key areas. And then interviewing, helping the person kind of look at how interviews might have changed. Some of the changes, what are some of the changes that you've seen in interviewing now that jobs are going remote, or some places of employment? Many jobs are still hybrid. So there are certainly some changes in the interviewing. Anything in the chat, Darren? Different changes that people have seen?
Not on interviews, but just, how, people identify and have some shame in terms of maybe having the gaps in work history, maybe not being as successful as they were. I remember working with people who maybe have been in college or something and they didn't finish their degree program. So sometimes this can open up some past trauma, just getting ready for, the job application process.
That's a good point. And I think that, being there and talking with the person and walking through some of that trauma, but also, even if it wasn't a completed degree, maybe there are ways to add what courses the person did take that might be relevant to the job, or, if the person is considering returning to school, maybe somehow note that on the cover letter, if they anticipate, in the future returning to that. But yes, I think that's true. Brings up some past traumas and discomfort. So many of them are online. Maybe that's changing a little bit as people are heading back. but there are certainly some differences. So this, again, common, but I added some questions here on the PowerPoint, and we're not going to go through each of those, but they can be helpful when you're working with someone and preparing for the interview, making sure that they have questions for the employer, maybe work values related, work culture related, flexibility, work environment, advancement potential. So making sure that you're helping someone identify what some of those questions might be when the employer says, do you have any questions for me? They can be centered around these types of areas. If the person isn't sure what questions to ask, something maybe about flexibility or the work environment and what advancement opportunities are available and so forth. Consult with your HR people in your organizations. If you have hiring managers or other HR pros in your agency, maybe they'd be willing to give a brief overview or a brief discussion with you and individuals you're working with about what they look for. That could be a really valuable resource. And then again, these are just kind of highlighted areas just to, when you're working with someone, encouraging them to kind of greet the employer. These are the types of things that you want them to be mindful of. How do they manage nervousness? Maybe it's sitting on your hands if you're like fidgeting or, other ways, but bringing up these types of issues and potential challenges so that the person is prepared. How to respond to tough questions. What are those questions that might be really tough? I think I added some here in the PowerPoint just as a resource, but helping the person, how do I respond when someone asks, what are my weaknesses, and so on. So again, after the interview, sending a thank you, a follow-up phone call or email, whatever is appropriate for that particular setting. But I'm just going to go through these because these are really more for you to have as a resource, but kind of some common questions. And then the locating employers is really for another training. So we're kind of wrapping up now. And what I'll do is, Darren, if it's okay, go through that job seeking skills workbook and kind of share that we have like a minute or so left. Maybe as I'm getting that, you can.
Well, I just wanted to share, Deborah, share that sometimes there's a group interview process,
Yes.
which can even raise anxiety even further, particularly if it's now maybe in person. During COVID, a lot of interviews were done on,
Yes.
Zoom. So that can be another level of anxiety. A lot of great questions. Thank you for the interaction today and some sharing other resources today in the chat. That's very nice.
Yes, thank you. Just pull this up. So this is a sample, but it kind of gives you an idea of what's included. A whole section on applications, a whole section on resumes, kind of going through what we talked about today, interviewing and so on. So it's on there, it's on the PowerPoint, but it gives sample applications and just worksheets that you can work with individuals or maybe provide to help engage them in the job search. So that's the end of the sample, but again, it's, fairly not lengthy, but user-friendly, has all of the information that could be helpful in the job search.
Particularly homework assignments to give somebody so they can come back with some information after the session.
So Darren, I think we are at the end. I just want to put up my email. So
yeah, and I'll send out a thank you email for attending today with a copy of the PowerPoint. So thank you all for participating with DBHR and Rutgers today. It's always a pleasure to see so many people come together and so much sharing in the chat and folks coming off mic today to add some additional information. So I really want to thank you everybody for the participation today. And thank you
so
again,
much.
Jody.
Yes, thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Take care.
You too. Bye.